Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Footy with Fletch podcast. Today I'm joined by Carey McKernan. He's a two-time Premiership player with North Melbourne. He played 237 AFL games, both with North Melbourne and Carlton, and he played with the Kangaroos from 1993 to 2001 before he was traded to Carlton. He was then at the Blues from 2002 to 2003 before returning to North Melbourne for the 2004 season. Hello, Carey. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Hey, mate. How you going?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I'd imagine that I can see your Carlton logo in the back there. I'd imagine that you're very happy at the moment with the way the Blues are going. And I must admit, the Blues, out of everyone at the moment, are probably one of my favourite teams to watch. I just think with the big guys up forward, it's as much as you got Paddy Cripps, who I probably think's the best player in the competition, but especially having those big boys up forward for a fellow power forward, it's great to watch when you can see some big boys down there like that taking contested marks.
They are playing some good footy this year, and you mentioned having some fellow tall men down there. You were a tall player during your career. How difficult was it during training being one of the taller players out on the training track?
Oh, mate, I never ever thought about it. If anything, even though I was a big player, I probably used to just think of myself as, I never really thought of myself. I know that sounds silly, but I never tried to think that you're big. And, I think sometimes people pigeonhole themselves that you're big. And like on a wet day, for example, when certain players think that just because it's wet, you can't play well, you got to flip conventional thinking on its head. I know, for example, Wayne Carey and I would have games at training, like to see who could take the best slider at training at Arden Street. So if you go into anything with the right attitude, and I probably took that into my football as well, that if I'm playing in the ruck, well, there's no reason why I can't go forward and kick goals when I go forward. So wherever you are on the ground, I think if you've got that mentality, I'd recommend that to any young player out there. Don't just go into it. If I'm a forward, we'll then learn how you can also, if you're a tall forward, eventually you're going to have to play in the ruck at some point. Whether you take a centre bounce or not, but add more strings to your bow so that you're more valuable to your team, that just in case one day your ruckman goes down, and by the way, you're only going to increase the value of your footy contract if you can play multiple positions.
You were a versatile player during your career. What was it like to be one of the best ruckmen in the competition during your time?
I don't know. I never really looked at it that way. I think I just always had a mindset that you always wanted to improve. But then I think the other part of it is too, we were very fortunate that we played in a lot of big, meaningful games. And that was probably the best thing, knowing that at that time, which people may find strange now, but we were playing anywhere from 8 to 12 Friday night games a year. So as we know, Friday night football, for everyone out there, everyone loves Friday night football, but no one loved it more than us players at the North Melbourne Football Club. And I think we also treated it as a real badge of honour that we had to defend our, this was like our turf. You're coming to play Friday night and you're playing against North Melbourne, who started Friday night footy. And we played a lot of great Friday night games. Where we played Carlton, Essendon, Collingwood, Richmond, all the big teams on Friday nights. And that was your real opportunity. It was, if you wanted to be considered a great player, you want to play well on the big stage. And we were fortunate enough, we play Friday night games at the MCG very regularly, but the continuation of that, it was good preparation for going into the finals. At least we knew, or you knew as an individual, if you played well on Friday night footy, well, you knew you could take that into playing on the big games at the MCG, and it was very thankful having that opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of those other big names. Of course, you played in two winning grand finals in 1996 and 1999. What was it like for you individually to be able to play in such big games?
Yeah, I think for me, when I look back at it now, again, it probably is a bit of a badge of honour to know that you're able to perform on the biggest stage of all. I think that's as players that when you're starting off your footy career, if you're fortunate enough to be in that position, we all see the grand final on the TV, and it's something that I can look back very fondly on now. That also very lucky at that time that having someone like Dennis Pagan, that the one thing that Dennis was really good at, and it's a great advice for anyone going into finals. And if I ever talk to local football teams about keeping your routine you do during the home and away season, you make sure you execute that to a T going into those big games. So it was great having that, that same structure and routine going into those games. But I think as a player, you've also got to embrace the fact that this is the pointy end of the season, and if I'm going to be known as a good player, I think and it is a fine line when I'm talking about. I think in some sense you want to treat it the same, but I think it's also got that bit of a hard edge to it to go, if I want to be considered a great player, I've actually really got to step up on these days. And it's a good, healthy amount of pressure. I don't think you can let it get too overwhelming. And I used to love it, like especially when we ran out in the ground and that wall of sound that would hit you. I think you really, and it's something that I think the bigger clubs like the Carltons, the Collingwoods and the Essendons and Richmonds, I think it's something as football clubs that they've got a huge advantage over a lot of other teams, because if you're used to playing on those big games where they play one another and they're playing in front of 85,000 people, those a lot haven't done that for a while, that they've got such an advantage that they know that once they've played well at the MCG in front of a big crowd, well, that they know the finals aren't too dissimilar. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I think it's something as a player that when you get to those big occasions, you don't want to be overwhelmed by the pressure, but you also know it's a healthy amount of pressure that, hey, I know I've got to step up and perform on these big days.
It's a really great answer, and it's great to get some insight on that. You mentioned Wayne Carey a little bit earlier in the interview. What was it like to play alongside him and to be captained by him during your career?
Look, the most underrated thing about Wayne Carey that people don't didn't get to see, and I think it's what maybe the effect of like what the great players have it do at every football club, whether it was Carlton with Stephen Kernahan once upon a time, or even Chris Judd when he came to Carlton and the effect that he had. The great thing that I learned off of Wayne Carey again was how he prepared for games of football. So you have your usual training sessions, which might be once, twice, or three times a week. But the one thing that Wayne was great at was all the extras that he'd do during the week. And I would follow everything that he did in terms of, he'd go for an extra swim during the week. He'd do extra goal kicking. There are all these little things and parts to his game that people didn't see from the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday type sessions. It would be everything over and above. And when you hear it from players that are involved with them, like I think even in terms of Chris Judd would do exactly the same. Could have had the normal sessions that everyone else does, but I think it's all the extras over and above that what makes them great players and their effect on the group.
Yeah, he definitely is a great player, and it's great to get that insight that they do go on and do more stuff out of the usual training sessions, like you mentioned. Of course, in 1994, you polled the most votes in the Rising Star Award. However, unfortunately, you were ineligible to win. How difficult was this moment during your career?
Oh, look, it wasn't. The Rising Star never really bothered me. I don't know whether I I think the rumour has it that I probably would have ended up with the most amount of votes, but I was ineligible. I was tripping by hand. Didn't really bother me that much at the time because I think once you know you're not going to win something, it's not something that you're bitterly disappointed about. To be honest, at that point, I was probably more concerned. That was like my first real year in the seniors, so I was more concerned about establishing myself in the senior team at North Melbourne rather than I got 1 week for tripping by hand, and that rule they ended up getting rid of a year later. And we were more concerned at that point. I think North Melbourne was on a journey, and we were trying to go as deep in the finals as we could. And that year we finished in the prelim final, and we got beaten by Gary Ablett, kicked a goal after the siren and put Geelong into the grand final. So they were some of the seeds, a bit of disappointment, then ended up holding us in good stead.
This next question's from a listener, and they want to know, do you have a particular memory of walking into the room of supporters at the Premiership dinner after 1996, and do you remember the moment?
Yeah, look, again, it's so long ago, but your best memories of that night are, I remember coming down Arden Street in the bus, and because you're coming from the city, you can't see Arden Street, but then when we came over the hill, you could see the glow of lights coming from Arden Street, and I think there were probably 15 or 20,000 people at Arden Street that night. So a little bit that night I remember. We obviously had the function, which is great because you have all the key people and key supporters there, but probably my favourite memory is then the Sunday, the day after the grand final, when we're a little bit more clear of mind and we're not caught up in the euphoria. We haven't probably had as many drinks by that point. But, to be able to go out there on the Sunday at Arden Street and see all the North Melbourne people, it's as great as it is to win it as players, but knowing you've delivered this for the fans was even better.
It is a great point that you do make. The fans are so important within football. And another moment during your career that is sort of well documented is that in the 1996 Brownlow medal, you tied on votes with Michael Voss and James Hird. However, you were ineligible to win that award as well. How difficult was that for you, given that you couldn't win it due to suspension as well?
Yeah, it's never really bothered me. I think the thing that I'm forever grateful, everything that happened all that week, and to be able to basically have the entire world thrown at me in grand final week, that I'd hurt my knee in the prelim final. That was on the Saturday before the grand final, so a week before. The Monday, the Brownlow medal happened. Even by the Wednesday, there was talk that I may not play in the grand final with my knee because I had about 40 or 50 mils of blood drained out of my knee. But I think because I think all of us had a purpose, but me individually, I wanted to win a medal for people who'd been at North Melbourne for a long time and had been through journeys, like whether it's Sholey or Lades or Darren Crocker or Ian Fairley. Like, I wanted to win a medal for them. So to be able to put everything that happened to me personally that week, whether it was my knee or the Brownlow, I didn't really care. I was hell-bent on playing well, and still to be able to come out in the grand final, and I had 30 or 31 possessions playing in the ruck in the grand final. I wouldn't trade anything in the world for the way, I was only 22 years old, to be able to come out in the biggest week and the biggest stage and put everything to the side and still perform in the grand final is that's better than winning the Brownlow.
It's a great point that you make, and it's great that you have put winning a premiership for the fans and for those other players ahead of an individual memory. However, also in your career, you were traded from North Melbourne at the end of 2001 to Carlton. What sort of prompted that move to the Blues?
Yeah, well, that was, when we say traded, it was my decision that I wanted to go to Carlton. I wanted to make a fresh start, as it's probably well publicised. Look, even my relationship with Dennis, it was more the fact of, like you having a boss at work, that you're not getting the best out of one another. And that's as simple as what it was. And I wanted to be able to go somewhere different. And in the end, I went to Carlton. And whilst things started off a little bit rocky at Carlton from a personal point of view, obviously that year was not great from a team point of view. But look, the first 5 or 6 weeks at Carlton were pretty tough for me. But again, I was actually asked recently, I go, what's maybe the best thing that comes out of your football career? I would probably say resilience. I think that's the key word that comes through. The resilience and the hard work, and knowing that if you can be resilient enough, but then more importantly, put the hard work into it, you can get through anything. And that's what sort of happened at Carlton as well, that I was able to get through a tough time, work my way through it, had the support of some great people there in terms of Wayne Britton was amazing for me, and even Stephen Kernahan and Craig Bradley at that point. It was great to have that sort of support, and I was fortunate enough I did win the club best and fairest that year.
You have had a lot of great moments during your career, but I guess you mentioned some of your coaches earlier. What was it like to be coached by Dennis Pagan at North Melbourne, but then also to be coached by Wayne Britton, like you mentioned, at the Blues?
Oh, look, there's sort of two vastly different coaches. Like, and even for me individually, like, I think the greatest thing that what Dennis would leave any of these players with would be about your preparation. And I think they're great life lessons that anyone can do. Like, I think the things like preparation and never getting ahead of yourself, and some of them they might be old-fashioned values, but they're things that are going to hold people in good stead. Wayne Britton's a little bit different, but Wayne was great in terms of, well, he was great for me in terms of supporting me individually. Again, was that great for the team? No, but I think every player is going to have different memories of different coaches. But that's not to say both of them were great for me in terms of supporting me and getting the best out of me at different times.
You were lucky to be coached by some great coaches during your football career. What do you think would have been the most memorable sledge that you would have received on the football field during your career?
No, I wouldn't say, to be honest, it wouldn't have come from the opposition, because it actually would have come, the things that, one thing that people should understand is that North Melbourne, everyone was equal, and it didn't matter whether you were Wayne Carey to the boot starter or someone coming in the front door, that no one was sacred. Like, everyone was, there was no one that was not off limits in terms of, we really used to take the mickey out of one another, and it held me in good stead, because if you could give it back amongst the group at North Melbourne, there was nothing anyone else could say. And if anything, it made you a master. It'd be like if you bagged me, I'd probably either bag myself even more and leave you nowhere to go. So it was like a school, the art of banter and basically hanging shit on one another. I had the ultimate grounding at the North Melbourne Footy Club. And you know what? Some people might think, oh, well, you're doing that to one another, but it was also a great part of the footy club. It just basically showed it didn't matter whether you're Wayne Carey down to, like I mentioned, whether it's the boot starters or whether it's a young kid on the list. It basically showed everyone was equal, and it was a great part of what made us successful.
It is a great part of the North Melbourne Football Club. And you mentioned Wayne Carey earlier. Other than Wayne Carey, who do you think would have been some of the favourite players that you got to train alongside and play with during your career?
Oh, look, at North Melbourne during that time, we were very, very, very fortunate when you look back over the teams that played, during that period. There's so many great players that you can rattle off, whether it's the likes of Anthony Stevens, Glenn Archer, and you got Mickey Martin that had to play on all the biggest names in the game. Ones that were underrated, like someone like John Blakey, that was amazing. Then you got David King, Byron Pickett. The other one that's, again, I think flies under the radar that people forget how good he was someone like Wayne Swass. Wayne Swass was amazing. But then I sometimes get asked, like, who is the best opposition player that we played against? And I think the one, I know that it was maybe only a patch of football, but I always say the footy that Anthony Koutafidis played against us. I think in the year 2000, there was a game at, I tell Kuta this, there was a game at then Optus Oval, and I think he had 38 possessions and kicked 5 goals. And I always say that that was the best football I saw an opposition player play against the North Melbourne team. I think in the last quarter, they might have even put Wayne Carey on Kuta in the end, which was probably the ultimate compliment.
Yeah, Kuta must have been a great player to be able to play against during your career. And in your post-football career, you're the founder of Walk With Me. Can you tell myself and my listeners a little bit about Walk With Me and why you sort of founded and created this initiative?
Yeah, look, it was probably after seeing a headline in the Australian newspaper that the suicide toll was going to outstrip the coronavirus toll. And then I cut a long story short, I thought, what can I actually do? Whilst we're much better at having conversations in the space in and around mental health, but I thought, what can I actually do? And then at that time, I come up with the idea about doing some live Zoom walks. And I think that first year of the pandemic in 2020, I think I did 101 live Zoom walks, which, well, obviously, look, to know that you helped a lot of people through the pandemic. And what we try and do, we basically get on there with ideas about how you could help your physical and mental fitness. You know what I mean? And a lot of it, whether that was to do with their daily routines, how they can structure their days, whether it's about meditation, whether it's about diet, whether all the different things that go into making you successful. And what I wanted to do, it's more in the space of how can we be a platform that's more sharing ideas, that's around prevention, rather than worrying about after things and the horse is bolted at the end. How can we come up with more ideas that you can have regular checks on what you're doing? And it's evolving now. We've been going 2 years, and I think we're about to tweak it a little bit, because obviously being able to do walks during the pandemic was very, very much needed. But we are going to turn it more into a resource and a platform where I'll do lots of interviews like this. I've interviewed Eddie Maguire, James Hird, Wayne Carey, John Daly, Mark Leishman, whole range of different names. But again, it's about how we've got to evolve and we've got to change, and how can we make it relevant, because it is a very much needed resource in today's society.
It's a great initiative, and well done about thinking about that, because the COVID-19 lockdowns and the pandemic itself was such a difficult time for so many people. So well done again on that. Moving to a very current football issue. On the front bar last week, you were sort of talking about the fact that you sort of have a plan about what the AFL needs to do in a ruck contest. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what you think they need to do to minimise some of the PCL injuries that have been occurring?
I think, I don't know how well I explained it on the front bar last week, but in my eyes, it's a very simple thing that it can be fixed. I don't know how it came into our game. I've got half a theory, but I don't want to say it. But I don't know how it came into our game where it is accepted that two ruckmen can look at each other and run and jump into one another. And my theory about how you can fix it, I thought was very simple, that yes, if I'm standing across the line, of course I need to know where you're coming from. I'm in agreement with that. But once the umpire throws the ball up, your eyes should be focused at the ball. It's very simple. It doesn't matter what anyone else says, because I've had this conversation even with Simon Madden, who's basically, I consider, the greatest ruckman of all time. And it is, when people talk about the art of ruck work, it is an art. It is an art to actually do that. Once the umpire throws the ball up, it is an art to watch the ball, then continue to watch the ball, but jump in early enough and then take the space to the other ruckman. What's happening now is you are dramatically increasing the chances that two ruckmen are going to go knee on knee, or you're increasing the percentages of actual this continued body contact. What I'm saying, I'm not saying it's going to stop it, but it's going to dramatically decrease the chances of it actually happening. When you had two happen on the one weekend, Even back to my incident in 1996, Matthew Clark took his eyes off the ball, ran straight in, went knee on knee. So I don't know. Again, Fletcher, I don't know how you fix it, mate. The last thing I want to do is confuse the umpires because I think they've got enough on their plate. But it's a very simple thing when you think about it. If we're going, I don't know when it became into vogue. My question to the AFL would be, in the ruck, I'm allowed to take my eyes off the ball, am I? And they go, no. And I go, well, why are you letting it happen? It's very simple. As soon as the ball's thrown up, there should be two sets of eyes watching that ball. So I challenge anyone watching this at the moment, watch on this weekend and see how many times the two ruckmen where they'll come in and they're both looking at one another. It's a crazy, ugly situation that's been allowed to evolve over the last 10 years where they're accepting it. It's the only position on the ground. If we were going for a mark and I took my eyes off the ball, it would be a free kick, wouldn't it? But we've allowed it to happen in the centre of the ground. Honestly, it's such a simple way to fix it, where as soon as I throw the ball up, both eyes should be on the ball. That is it. You should not even be then watching the other ruckman. If you're allowing it to happen, you're basically saying, I'm allowed to take my eyes off and run in. That's my little rant on that. But honestly, I reckon it's easily fixed if they want to fix it.
It is great to get your insight on that. And just finally, what do you think are some of the things that you'd like to enjoy outside of football?
Outside of football, I don't know. Look, I'm very fortunate with, I think I moved up to Queensland, 3.5 years ago, and I'm pretty grateful of where we live, though. At the moment, I think we've had 120 millimetres of rain over the last 24 hours. But no, I'm pretty grateful of where I live at the moment. You know, I mean, I'm very lucky that I get to drive my kids to school. I've got a pretty flexible sort of lifestyle with what I get to do. I get to play golf. So yeah, I suppose I'm just trying to enjoy a lot of things in all facets of life. That'd be my advice to everyone. It's if you can try and enjoy lots of the little things. And like I said, I'm very fortunate. I get to whether it's driving my girls to school or where I live and what I get to do. It's showing that bit of gratitude, because I think sometimes people have got the attitude of glass half empty rather than glass half full.
Yeah, it's been great to talk to you today, Corey. Thank you very much for joining me on the Footy with Fletcher podcast.
No worries, mate. Pleasure.
It is. So there you have it. Corey McKernan has joined me on the Footy with Fletch podcast.